I should have said no. When my coworker Mike first suggested setting me up with his amazing friend, I laughed it off. Blind dates weren't my thing, and Valentine's Day was the last day I wanted to spend awkwardly making small talk with a stranger. But Mike was relentless. "She's funny, smart, and gorgeous, man. Just one dinner. Worst case, you get an awkward story." He had a point. After spending my last shift watching couples clink glasses over overpriced steaks, maybe I'd surprise myself. That was mistake number 1. Mistake number 2? Not asking for more details. The restaurant was a small Italian bistro in Wicker Park, cozy, dimly lit, and filled with the scent of garlic and fresh bread. It wasn't overly fancy, just nice enough to set the mood. I got there early, texted Mike to let him know I was on board with his ridiculous setup, and sat at the bar, nursing a whiskey. Then she walked in. Claire. She was beautiful in a put-together, effortless way. Dark brown hair and a sleek ponytail, deep green eyes, and red lipstick that matched her dress. She smiled when she spotted me, and for a moment, I thought maybe this wouldn't be so bad. We ordered drinks, and conversation flowed effortlessly. She was easy to talk to, laughed at my jokes, asked about my job as a paramedic, even shared some weird customer stories from her own job in marketing. It felt normal, until it didn't. "You must be exhausted," she said, absent-mindedly stirring her drink. "After last night's shift, closing that late must have been rough." I blinked. "How'd you know I closed?" She giggled. "Mike mentioned it." That made sense. I shrugged it off, but something about the way she said it, so casual, like she wasn't thinking about it, rubbed me the wrong way. I changed the subject. Bad move. The conversation shifted to family, and I mentioned my younger brother Matt, who had just started college. "Oh, at Loyola, right?" My stomach tightened. I hadn't mentioned the school. "Yeah," I said slowly. "How'd you know that?" She tilted her head, smiling like it was a joke. "You posted about it, the picture at his dorm move-in. So cute." I stared at her. That post was from months ago, buried deep in my feed. Something was off. I glanced at my phone, trying to think of an excuse to leave, but before I could, she spoke again. "I love that little coffee shop you go to, by the way. You always sit by the window, fidgeting with your phone while you wait for your order." I froze. I never mentioned where I got coffee. I never noticed her there. I tried to change the subject, but Claire leaned in, resting her chin on her hand, eyes locked on mine. "You think you're hard to follow," she whispered. "You're not." I felt sick. The waiter appeared, asking if we wanted another round. I shook my head, already standing. "I should get going, early shift tomorrow." Claire's face didn't change. She just sighed and leaned back in her chair. "I knew you'd try to run." My stomach lurched. I stepped back, nearly knocking into the waiter. "What?" She stood slowly, smoothing her dress. "You always leave places early, always take the long way home, always cut through the alley behind your building instead of the main street." My heart pounded. "How long have you been watching me?" She just smiled. "You're overthinking this." I bolted, walked out the door without looking back. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone, texting Mike. "Who the hell is Claire?" His response came fast. "What do you mean? She said you guys were hitting it off." "No, she knows things about me. Personal things." A pause, then, "That's weird, but maybe she just saw stuff online." I wanted to believe that, but I knew better. A notification popped up. Unknown number. Running doesn't help you, Jake. My mouth went dry. I scanned the sidewalk. People walked past, lost in their own worlds. No sign of her. No sign of anyone watching. For the next few days, I barely slept. Then, the messages started. At first, they were harmless. "You left so fast, I wasn't done talking." Then, "You always take 8th Street home, but not tonight. Smart." Then, "I'll see you soon." I blocked the number, switched my routine, started going to a different coffee shop. I thought that was enough, until Mike pulled me aside at work a week later. "She came in again," he said, voice low. "Asked where you were. I told her you had the night off, and she just smiled, like she already knew." That night, nothing happened. No texts, no sign of her. A few days passed, then a week, then two. I started to let my guard down. Until one late shift, walking home, I saw her, standing near my building. Her back was to me, but she was staring up at my apartment window. I froze. For a second I thought about turning back, but I was too close. She had to have seen me. So I gritted my teeth and walked past, refusing to look at her, acting like I didn't recognize her. She didn't move. Not when I unlocked the door. Not when I slipped inside and ran up the stairs. 2 nights later, I woke up to my phone vibrating. A notification. AirDrop request. 1 photo. I grabbed my phone, squinted at the screen. Another request. 1 photo. Then another. And another. I turned off my phone, heart hammering, but before I did, I caught a glimpse of the last request. The image was grainy and dark, but I knew exactly what it was. My bedroom window. From outside. Our anniversary dinner was supposed to be perfect. 15 years together. A rare evening where we could forget about work, responsibilities, and just enjoy each other. I chose Pier 47, a quiet, upscale seafood restaurant on Fisherman's Wharf with a view of the bay, warm candlelight, and soft jazz drifting through the air. The kind of place where everything should feel intimate, romantic, but from the moment we sat down, something felt wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone, that something unseen was pressing in around us. I scanned the room, trying to pinpoint what was making my skin crawl. That's when I saw him, a man in a dark gray suit sitting alone in the back corner. His posture was too rigid, his expression unreadable. He wasn't eating, not even drinking, just sitting there, staring, not at the window, not at his phone, at me. I tried to ignore it, focusing on Robert as he talked about a new client at work, but every time I glanced up, the man's cold, unblinking gaze was still locked on me. "Emily, are you even listening?" Robert's voice broke through my thoughts. "Yeah," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just distracted." I wasn't sure why I felt so uneasy. It wasn't like he was doing anything, but something about him was wrong. I needed confirmation. As our waiter passed, I leaned in, keeping my voice low. That man in the back corner. Has he been here long? The waiter gave a quick glance over his shoulder. "That guy? Yeah, he's been here for hours. Ordered 1 glass of whiskey, never touched it." A chill ran down my spine. "Hours?" "Since before my shift started." He hesitated. "Is he bothering you?" I wasn't sure how to answer that. "No," I muttered, "just weird." The waiter nodded and walked away. I turned back toward the corner booth. The man was gone. The whiskey glass sat there, still untouched. Robert reached for my hand, smiling. "Relax, it's our anniversary. Nothing else matters tonight." I nodded, trying to convince myself he was right. Maybe the man had just left. Maybe I was being paranoid. Then the waiter returned, sliding something onto the table next to my plate. A small, folded cocktail napkin. "This is from that man," he said. My stomach twisted. I hesitated, then unfolded it. "Everything has a price. Name yours." I froze. "Emily? What is that?" I crumpled the napkin in my fist. "We need to go." "What? Why?" "I don't like this place. Let's just go, okay?" Robert frowned, clearly confused, but something in my face must have convinced him because he didn't argue. I threw a couple of bills on the table, grabbed my coat, and stood. As soon as we moved, I felt it, the weight of eyes on me. I turned. The man in the gray suit was standing near the exit, waiting, smiling. I grabbed Robert's arm and pushed past him. He didn't follow, but as we stepped out onto the street, I still felt him watching. The night air was cold and salty, the streets crowded with tourists, street performers, and vendors selling flowers. I gripped Robert's hand tightly, my heart still pounding. "Emily, what the hell is going on?" I pulled the napkin from my pocket and handed it to him. Robert frowned as he read the message. His face paled. "What does this mean?" "I don't know, and I don't want to find out." We checked over our shoulders 3 times before getting in the car. I drove in the opposite direction of our apartment, weaving through different streets, making sure we weren't being followed. Only when we were miles away did I finally let out a breath. We never saw the man again, but the next morning, when I reached into my coat pocket, my fingers brushed against something cold. A business card. I yanked it out. The card was blank except for one thing, an address. I typed it into Google. No business, no company, just an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. I stared at my screen, my stomach churning. How did he put this in my coat? I thought back to the moment we passed him in the restaurant. The slight bump as we walked by, the way his hand brushed against my sleeve. I thought about the way he smiled at Robert, how he wasn't looking at me in that moment. He was looking past me, at Robert, at his watch, his wedding band, his suit. A slow, sickening realization settled in my gut. Everything has a price. Name yours. What if he wasn't talking to me? What if he was making an offer? And what if, just once, someone had said yes? Max had always been intense. When we first started dating, I mistook it for passion. He wanted to be around me all the time, knew my coffee order by heart, memorized the little details I barely noticed about myself. "You're the only thing that matters to me," he'd say. I used to think that kind of devotion was romantic. That was before the cemetery. "Come on, Jordan, I have something special planned." Max grinned, squeezing my hand as we walked through the gates of Bonaventure Cemetery. The air was thick with the scent of damp moss, the ground shrouded in mist that curled around the tombstones like skeletal fingers. The paths wound through the graves, some marked with towering angel statues, others barely legible from centuries of rain. I loved cemeteries, the stillness, the eerie beauty, the weight of time pressing down on everything. "A late night walk through a graveyard," I teased. "What, are you trying to scare me?" "I know you, Jordan," he said, his voice smooth. "I know this is your kind of thing." I smiled, but something about the way he said it felt wrong. We walked deeper into the cemetery, away from the tourist paths, away from the flickering streetlights beyond the wrought iron gates. The farther we went, the quieter it got, the air pressing heavier against my skin. I tried to ignore the creeping unease settling in my stomach, convincing myself it was just the setting, just the isolation. Then I saw it. A single bouquet of fresh lilies, placed neatly on a grave. I stepped closer, tilting my head at the white envelope tucked between the flowers. The paper was damp from the night air, but the ink was clear. My name written on the front in Max's handwriting. I stared at it. "Max," I said slowly, my pulse quickening. "What is this?" He smiled. "Open it." I didn't want to, but I did. "You'll never leave me, not even in death." My breath hitched. "Max," I whispered, "this isn't funny." His expression didn't change. "It's not a joke, Jordan, it's a promise." I stepped back, heart hammering. "This is sick. We're leaving." I turned, but before I could take a step, his hand clamped around my wrist. "Jordan, don't ruin this." His grip tightened. "You always pull away, always try to run, but you're mine." I tried to yank free, but his fingers dug into my skin, his strength overpowering mine. "Let go of me. I can't," he whispered. Something in his voice sent ice down my spine. I didn't think, I just swung my arm, nails raking against his skin. He cursed, loosening his grip for just a second, and I ran. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away, feet pounding against the dirt path, breath ragged. I could hear him behind me, calling my name, his footsteps fast and heavy. The graves blurred past, shadows twisting under the moonlight. I didn't stop until I reached the iron gates, my fingers fumbling against the rusted metal as I shoved through and onto the empty street. When I turned back, Max was gone. I didn't sleep that night. I blocked his number, changed my locks, told myself he'd give up, that I'd scared him off. But then the lilies started appearing. On my doorstep, in my locker at school, once even inside my car, neatly placed on the passenger seat. The first time I threw them away. The second time, I started triple-checking that my windows were locked. The third time, I realized Max wasn't just leaving flowers. He was watching. Late at night, I started noticing a figure standing at the end of my street, just out of reach of the streetlights, motionless. Never knocking, never calling, just standing there. I told myself it was paranoia. Until the night I woke up to the sound of my bedroom window sliding open, I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The room was silent, but I felt someone there. I reached for my phone with shaking hands, turned on the flashlight and swept it across the room. My window was open, and sitting on my nightstand was a single white lily. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, and I ran. I stayed with my friend Rachel for the next week, but Max never stopped. I got texts from unknown numbers. "You can't hide from me. We belong together. Come home, Jordan." I changed my number. The messages kept coming. Then Rachel got a call at work, a man asking about me. That was it. I went to the police. I filed a restraining order. I told them everything. The grave, the notes, the flowers, the night he was in my room. They said they'd look into it. Then, just like that, Max disappeared. For the first time in months, I slept without waking up gasping for air. For the first time, I let myself believe it was over. Then, on the anniversary of that night in Bonaventure, I came home to a package sitting outside my door. No return address. I didn't want to open it, but my hands were already moving, peeling back the tape, pulling out a single bouquet of lilies. And a note. "We'll always be together." I burned it, but no matter how much time passes, I still feel it. The weight of his eyes, watching, waiting. And I know, deep down, he's not done with me yet. I used to think bartending was the perfect job for someone like me. I'm a people person, I love music, and I'm happiest when the night is buzzing with conversation and laughter. In Austin, especially downtown, there's always something happening. A live show, a festival, a parade of tourists eager to taste local craft beers and fancy cocktails. I work at a rooftop bar that overlooks the skyline, bright lights dancing off steel and glass, and every night I get to watch the sun dip behind the city before neon signs flicker to life. It's almost magical, that moment when evening hushes and the crowd starts pouring in, excited to celebrate or commiserate or just forget their troubles for a while. I've seen couples come in for first dates, sweaty-palmed and nervous, and I've seen them come back on anniversaries, comfortable and intimate. Sometimes I wonder how they get from that awkward beginning to a place where they share inside jokes over a single plate of fries. Maybe that's why. I let myself download a dating app after my last relationship crashed and burned. I thought it would be a shortcut to one of those cozy, easy connections I watched happen every night. When I first matched with Ryan, he seemed normal, charming even. His profile was simple, just a few pictures of him in different places around Austin, smiling in most, wearing sunglasses in one so I couldn't see his eyes. We started chatting, and he came across as funny and genuine, asking questions about my favorite music, if I had any pets, if I preferred breakfast tacos or barbecue for a lazy Sunday meal. It felt harmless, like maybe, just maybe, I'd lucked out and found someone decent. He told me he was a graphic designer working for a small tech startup. He asked about my bartending schedule, said he might drop by for a drink sometime. I didn't love how quickly he wanted details about when I worked, but I brushed it off as curiosity. Then he started messaging more often, too often. If I didn't reply within a few minutes, he'd send another text. "You busy? Or everything okay?" At first, I'd laugh about it with my coworker, Lisa. I'd wave my phone in the air like, "Look at this, he's so eager," and she'd shrug, say something like, "He's just excited about you," which calmed me for a bit, but his questions kept getting more personal. "Where exactly in Austin do you live? What time do you get off work? Do you hang out with a lot of guys there?" I felt a twinge of unease. Then came Valentine's Day. I'd mentioned in passing that I'd be stuck bartending until late, that the place would probably be packed, that I didn't have a Valentine anyway, so I might as well make good tips. He asked if we could meet after my shift for a drink, and I hesitated. I was getting a vibe that was hard to describe, like something in my gut was telling me not to. I politely declined, said I'd be too exhausted, maybe another day. He didn't respond, so I shrugged it off and went about my life, not giving it much thought. But then he showed up at the bar. I didn't recognize him at first. It was crowded. Valentine's Day in a city like Austin means every place with a view is slammed, couples ordering fancy cocktails, sharing desserts. Between mixing drinks and breaking up arguments about who had the best seat near the rail, I barely had time to breathe. At around 10, I glanced down the bar and saw a man sitting alone, hunched over his phone. He looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place him. Then Lisa nudged me. "He's been staring at you," she said under her breath. "Like really staring." I shrugged, told her maybe he was just waiting for a drink. When I made my way over, he lifted his head, and I realized with a jolt it was Ryan. He smiled, but something about it made my skin crawl. He didn't look exactly like his pictures. His eyes were harder, more intense. "Hey," I said, forcing a polite grin. "I didn't realize you were coming in tonight." "You said you'd be working," he replied, his tone casual, but there was a tension underneath that I couldn't ignore. I poured him a beer on the house because I felt awkward, then tried to move on to my other customers. But for the rest of the night, I could feel his gaze following me. Every time I looked up, he was there, watching. Toward closing, I gathered the courage to walk up and tell him we were shutting down soon. He just smiled and said, "Good. I'll walk you to your car." My heart kicked into overdrive. "Oh, I'm actually meeting friends after this," I lied. He just stared, then shrugged. "I can wait." Something in his voice told me he wouldn't take no for an answer. As soon as we locked the doors, I slipped out the back exit, telling Lisa I'd meet her at the taco truck down the block. She gave me a worried look, but nodded. I thought I was being slick, that I'd managed to avoid him, but as I rounded the corner into the parking lot, I saw him leaning against my car, arms crossed, a smirk on his face. "You trying to ditch me?" he asked, his voice low. My stomach dropped. "Ryan, it's been a long night. I just want to go home." "I get that," he said, taking a step closer. "But I was hoping we could spend some time together. I mean, that's why I came." "Out tonight," I muttered, fumbling for my keys. He stepped aside just enough so I could open the driver's door. "I'll text you," he said. I didn't reply. I locked the doors, started the engine, and pulled out, shaking so bad I almost clipped the curb. The second I got home, I blocked his number. The next day, a new Instagram account started following me. Blank profile, no posts, no followers. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe it was a bot. Then at work, Lisa said, "Your new admirer DM'd the bar's page, asking if you're single." I felt sick. I told her not to respond. That night, as I was closing up, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Look outside." My heart thudded. There was no way it was him, right? He was blocked. Another text. "I love that red top on you." I was wearing a red tank under my work shirt. I ran to the window and peered out onto the street. People milled around, searching for ride shares, oblivious to anything out of the ordinary. I turned off the bar lights, locked the door, and hurried down to the parking lot. I'd never felt so paranoid in my life, like every shadow was breathing, waiting to grab me. I slipped into my car and pressed the lock button repeatedly, my breath shaky. The next morning, I called my phone company and got a new number. I set all my social media accounts to private, changed my profile pictures, used a pseudonym. I told myself that was enough, that he'd get bored if he couldn't contact me. But a few days later, I found a sticky note stuck under my windshield wiper. "Nice move. Doesn't matter." That's when I started losing sleep. Lisa insisted I tell the police, but what would I say? He's following me, but I have no proof except weird texts and a sticky note. He shows up at the bar, but it's not like that's illegal. He might be that guy at the end of the block at night, or maybe not. I filed a report anyway, but they said the same thing. He hadn't committed a crime, so their hands were tied. We changed up the shifts, so I never closed alone. Lisa or one of the bouncers would walk me to my car, scanning the lot for anyone lurking. Sometimes it felt okay, like maybe he was gone. But then I'd notice a parked car idling with the headlights off, or a silhouette ducking behind a dumpster, and my heart would slam against my ribs. Valentine's Day came again. The bar was packed, though I found a grim sort of comfort in the chaos. I assumed Ryan wouldn't try anything in a crowd, but at midnight, when I stepped away from the bar for a minute, my phone buzzed in my pocket. "Happy Valentine's Day. Miss me?" My mouth went dry. I clutched my phone, scanning the faces around me. Couples toasting, a few singles gloomily sipping whiskey, a group of friends partying it up. No one stood out, yet I couldn't shake the sense that he was right there, watching. I texted Lisa, told her to watch my section, and went to the bathroom to splash water on my face. A minute later, another text, "Don't run again." I almost dropped the phone. I forced myself to breathe, told myself to keep it together. When my shift finally ended, Lisa walked me to my car, but we didn't see anyone suspicious. The next morning, a single rose sat on my doorstep. No card, no note, but I knew. I started skipping the rooftop bar some nights, swapping shifts with coworkers so Ryan wouldn't know my schedule. I tried going to a different grocery store, leaving the house at random times, so he couldn't track my routine. For a week, everything was quiet. No messages, no flowers. I actually slept a full night, and I remember waking up relieved, thinking maybe the nightmare was finally over. Then, as I was heading to the bar one evening, my phone buzzed with a notification from an unknown number. A picture. I froze, dread twisting in my gut. Against my better judgment, I opened it. It was a photo of me in my car, just minutes earlier, waiting at a red light. My face was partially visible through the windshield, my lips tight, my hands on the steering wheel. The angle told me someone had been right beside me, close enough to tap on my window if they wanted. I turned the car around and drove straight to the police station, shaking so badly I could barely explain myself. They took the phone, told me they'd try to trace the number, but they didn't sound hopeful. "No crime has been committed," they said again, though this time they seemed sympathetic. I left the station feeling helpless. Lisa insisted I move in with her for a while. "You're not safe alone," she said. I couldn't argue. At her place, I kept the curtains drawn, the doors locked, a chair wedged under the knob for good measure. My phone stayed on silent, face down. I couldn't handle the jump in my pulse every time it lit up. But eventually, I had to check, and there it was. Another text. "You can block me, but you'll never escape me." That was all. No photo, no threat. Just a statement. I couldn't breathe for a solid minute. I read it again, hoping it was a trick of my mind, but the words stayed burned into the screen. In the days that followed, nothing happened. No messages, no roses, no sightings of suspicious cars. But the quiet felt more terrifying than the texts, like he was just waiting for me to let my guard down. Sometimes I'll be behind the bar, my hands sticky from lemon juice and spilled vodka, and I'll look up to scan the crowd. I'll see a man with dark hair, or a certain tilt of the head, and my heart will pound. I'll blink and he'll be gone. Or maybe he was never there. Lisa says I'm jumpy, that I should get away from the city for a while. I've thought about it, but why should I run? This is my home, my job, yet I can't shake the feeling that he's out there, watching, planning. Maybe he's just waiting for Valentine's Day to come around again. Maybe he's standing on the rooftop across from my building, phone in hand, camera zoomed in, snapping pictures through the blinds. I try to carry on, to pretend I'm strong, but I can't help checking my phone every few minutes, half expecting another message, half dreading it. Because the worst part is the uncertainty. Ryan could be gone forever, or he could be right behind me at any moment. And when I walk to my car alone on a quiet night, I remember that final text. "You can block me, but you'll never escape me." Sometimes I hear footsteps behind me, but when I turn around, the sidewalk is empty. Sometimes I see a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye, but it's only shadows. Or so I tell myself. It's strange how love and fear can twist together in the digital age. How easy it is for someone to slip into your life through a dating app and refuse to leave. I still bartend. I still smile at customers and laugh at their stories, but underneath the charm and the bright neon lights, there's a jagged edge of terror I can't file away. And I wonder if this will be my life from now on, always looking over my shoulder, always waiting for the next message, always haunted by the possibility that someone is watching. I guess time will tell. Maybe he'll move on. Maybe he already has. But until I'm sure, I keep my doors locked, my phone tight in my grip, and my heart pounding at the thought of what lies beyond the next corner. Because in a world where a simple swipe can connect two strangers, one of those strangers might decide you belong to him, whether you swipe left or right. And once he decides, you might realize too late that there's no escape. I moved back into the house the day after Evelyn's funeral. It was a decision I made in a haze of grief, my mind too numb to question whether returning to the place we shared so many memories would help or hurt. She and I had spent years restoring every inch of that historic Creole townhouse in the French Quarter. From the ornate ironwork on the balcony to the dusty attic filled with old trunks and brittle lace, we'd chosen every piece of furniture together, researched every architectural detail, laughed over which antiques were authentic and which were cheap replicas. When she died, it felt like I'd lost half of myself, so I thought maybe the house could be my anchor, a final connection to her. I was wrong. The first few nights felt empty, like I was rattling around a grand mausoleum instead of living in a home. The hardwood floors creaked with each step, and the walls whispered with the echoes of footsteps that weren't mine. I tried to attribute it all to normal old house noises, but something about it felt off, like the house had a pulse. I'd catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, a shadow sliding along the hallway, a flicker of light that seemed to dart behind a door. Sometimes I heard faint laughter, but whenever I turned off the record player or the TV, I realized there was no source for it. Grief plays tricks on the mind, or so I kept telling myself. I spent my days at the university, throwing myself into lectures about Louisiana history, the influence of French and Spanish architecture, the significance of voodoo practices in the region. My students noticed I wasn't quite myself, but I managed to bluff through. At night, I'd come home, unlock the heavy wooden door, and feel the same uneasy hush settle around me the moment I stepped inside. The doorknobs felt colder than they should, and sometimes I swore they turned on their own before I even put the key in. About a week in, I came home and found an envelope on the foyer table. It was cream-colored, thick paper, the kind Evelyn used for her personal stationery. My name was written on the front in her handwriting. My heart stuttered. She'd been gone a month, and I'd organized her desk right after the funeral, carefully placing her remaining cards and letters in a box. There was no reason for a fresh envelope with my name on it to be here. I picked it up, hands shaking, and opened it. The paper inside was blank. I stood there for a good minute, trying to force logic to explain it. Maybe it was an old leftover. Maybe I'd forgotten about it. But why was it set out so neatly on the table, as though someone had just placed it there for me to find? I barely slept that night. I kept imagining Evelyn at her desk, addressing notes for our friends, humming softly like she used to. The next morning, I found the envelope was gone. In its place was a pressed magnolia bloom, something Evelyn had loved to tuck into books or vases around the house. I started to feel a low buzz of dread, but I shoved it aside, telling myself grief was causing me to hallucinate small things or misremember where I put them. A few days later, I came home from work and tried to open the front door, but the handle wouldn't budge. I twisted the key, but it felt like something on the other side was bracing against it. I leaned my shoulder into the wood, gave a gentle shove, and suddenly it swung inward so fast I almost fell. The house was dim, the overhead lights off, the shutters closed. It felt like the walls were breathing. I could smell lavender and rosemary, Evelyn's favorite combination for potpourri, even though I hadn't refilled any bowls or sachets in months. My stomach knotted. I wandered through the living room, calling out as if someone might answer. Only silence greeted me. I moved to the parlor, the place where we used to read side by side in the evenings. On the table lay a single sheet of paper. A note. It read, "You're not alone." The handwriting looked so much like Evelyn's that my eyes burned with tears. Was it a cruel prank? Did someone break in, someone who knew how to mimic her writing? Or was my mind cracking under the weight of loss? I didn't call the police. I should have. Instead, I checked all the doors and windows, found them locked, no sign of forced entry. I tried to tell myself I must have left the note there without remembering, but that was absurd. My next thought was that maybe one of our close friends was trying to comfort me in some twisted way, but that didn't make sense either. I tore the note into pieces and threw it away, then spent the rest of the night with every lamp turned on, dozing fitfully on the sofa while the shadows in the corners seemed to shift. The following week, I began hearing whispers. Not loud, barely audible, more like a brush of breath against my ear when I stepped into certain rooms. At times, I'd catch words, phrases, like mark or stay. In the upstairs hallway, I felt something tug gently at my sleeve, and when I turned, nobody was there. Once, while brushing my teeth, I glanced at the fogged bathroom mirror and thought I saw Evelyn's face reflected behind me, her eyes full of longing, her lips parted as if she were about to speak. I whirled around, but there was only empty air and the faint smell of her perfume. I told myself it was memory, a cruel trick of the heart. One night I was jolted awake by the sensation of someone sitting on the edge of my bed. The mattress dipped, the sheets pulled tight against my leg. My heart hammered as I fumbled for the bedside lamp, but the room was empty. On the nightstand lay a note in that same familiar handwriting. "You don't need anyone else, only me." My blood ran cold. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was happening inside this house. I started to believe it was Evelyn. That belief came with both comfort and horror. If it was really her, why wouldn't she let me see her? Why these unsettling notes and movements in the dark? I tried to leave once, determined to stay with a friend until I could clear my head. I packed a small bag, but when I reached the front door, it wouldn't open. The knob refused to turn, like it was sealed shut. I went to the back door, but it was jammed as well, even though I never locked it from the inside. My frustration mounting, I scrambled for the windows, but they were stuck. My phone showed full bars, but none of my calls would connect. I felt like an animal trapped in a cage. After a long hour of struggling, I slumped in the hallway, breath ragged, too exhausted to comprehend what was happening. Then, as if the house decided to relent, I heard a soft click. The front door swung open on its own. The rush of night air against my face felt like a warning. If I tried to leave again, maybe the house wouldn't be so merciful. I stayed, telling myself I needed to unravel this. I pored over old photographs and letters, flipping through every page Evelyn and I had collected about the house's history. It was built in 1832 by a sugar baron who reportedly dabbled in voodoo. There were rumors of curses, of prior owners driven mad. None of that had mattered to us when we bought it. We loved the architecture, the romance of the French Quarter. Now each legend felt uncomfortably close to real. I read about spiritual attachments, about ghosts bound to places they loved, about how grief can open doors for restless souls. I started to think Evelyn's spirit wasn't at rest, and somehow the house was amplifying her presence. One evening, while searching the attic for any clue, I found an old trunk filled with journals, likely belonging to a past owner from the late 1000s, 800s. The entries spoke of a woman who died in the house, whose grief-stricken husband claimed her spirit remained, and that the house itself became her vassal. My hands shook as I read. She will not let me go. She has become the walls, the floors, the breath of every corridor. I see her face in every reflection. I am a prisoner here, bound by her endless love. The final pages were filled with frantic scribbles, no coherent words, just the sense of a mind unspooling into madness. That night I dreamed of Evelyn standing at the foot of my bed, looking heartbreakingly beautiful, tears glistening on her cheeks. She reached out, whispered, "Don't leave me. I need you." I woke in a sweat, tears running down my face, an ache in my chest so sharp I could hardly breathe. I realized how much I still longed for her, how the thought of truly letting her go felt like tearing out my own heart. In the hallway mirror the next morning I saw not my own reflection, but Evelyn's. She stood where I should have been, wearing the lilac dress she'd worn on our anniversary the year before she died. I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Her lips moved silently, and I understood. She was telling me we belonged together. that there was no reason to be apart just because her heart had stopped. When I blinked, the mirror returned to normal. I was shaking so hard I could barely stand. I wanted to run, but the house had other plans. Doors wouldn't open, phones wouldn't connect, windows refused to budge, even the electricity flickered unpredictably. The sense of being watched was constant, like eyes peering from every corner. That evening, I found another note on my pillow. Evelyn never left, you won't either. I sank to my knees, tears burning my eyes, whispering for her to let me go, that I loved her but I couldn't live like this. The walls groaned as if responding. Days blurred. I wandered room to room, calling her name, begging for a normal conversation. Anything but this haunting. The house felt alive, each floorboard creaking in time with my heartbeat. Sometimes I smelled her perfume drifting through the halls, or heard her soft laughter from another room. Once I felt her arms wrap around my waist, but when I turned there was nobody there, just my own ragged breath echoing off the plaster walls. Finally I staggered downstairs, resolved to break a window if I had to, but the moment I tried, the glass refused to crack. It was like striking a solid sheet of iron. I beat it until my fists throbbed, screaming, cursing, pleading, but the house swallowed every sound. I sank to the floor, exhausted. Then, out of nowhere, a hush fell. The entire house went still. No creaks, no flickers of shadow. That's when I felt her presence behind me. I turned slowly and saw Evelyn, or some shape of her, half translucent, her face glowing with an otherworldly light. She looked sad, desperate. She moved closer, her lips forming silent words. I felt a calm wash over me, as though every worry, every fear just melted into the floor. She reached out, and her hand brushed my cheek. Cold, yet comforting. I closed my eyes, and for a moment it was as if we were together again, like no time had passed, like death hadn't taken her away. When I opened my eyes, I was alone. I stumbled to my bedroom, collapsed onto the bed, and fell into a dreamless sleep. In the morning, I found a final note pinned to the door. You are mine now forever. The signature at the bottom was Evelyn's, but I sensed it was also the house, or whatever entity had bound itself to her spirit. I realized there would be no escape. I was a part of this place, just as she was. I tried one last time to push past the front door, but it wouldn't move. The windows stayed sealed, the phone lines dead. Even the electricity seemed to have a mind of its own, flickering to guide me from room to room. Now, I wander the house, speaking to her presence. At times, I see her in a mirror or hear her laugh echoing down the hallway. Sometimes she scolds me, telling me not to fight it. I no longer think of leaving. There's a strange peace in surrendering, in letting the house swallow me whole, because at least I'm not alone. The outside world feels like a distant memory. My colleagues will wonder why I stopped showing up to lectures. Friends might knock at the door, but the house will not let them in. And I won't answer. I belong here, with her. She never left, and now, neither will I. I always thought running a high-end boutique in Beverly Hills was the realization of my childhood dreams. I had spent years cultivating my brand, sourcing unique designs, and making personal connections with wealthy clients who wanted something truly exclusive. By my 33rd birthday, I had managed to lease a chic storefront on Rodeo Drive, a bright, airy space with glass walls and soft lighting that made every display shimmer. At the center of it all was a row of mannequins dressed in the season's latest pieces. They were simple fiberglass forms with sculpted faces, pretty enough to draw attention, but generic enough that they wouldn't compete with the clothes. Then Valentine's Day approached, and I decided it was time to do something more ambitious. I wanted a centerpiece that would captivate customers the moment they walked in, so I ordered a custom mannequin from an artisan who specialized in hyper-realistic figures. When the crate arrived, I was almost giddy with excitement. My employees gathered around as I pried it open. Inside was a male mannequin, tall and lean, with striking cheekbones and what felt like a lifelike texture to the skin. The face was painted with such detail that the eyes seemed to glisten in the overhead lights, and the lips had a faint curve that hinted at a smile. One of my employees, Bethany, let out a soft laugh. "Wow, that's creepy," she said, then quickly corrected herself. "I mean, it's impressive, just a little too real." I shrugged it off, chalking her reaction up to the unnerving quality of anything that blurs the line between person and object. We dressed it in a tailored suit, dark gray with a hint of shine, perfect for an upscale Valentine's display. I placed a red rose in its hand to complete the look, thinking it would be a romantic invitation for shoppers to come closer. That first night, I locked up as usual, turned off the lights and stepped onto the sidewalk with a feeling of satisfaction. There was a new energy in the store, something that might finally make our window display go viral on social media. But as I was walking away, I thought I heard a whisper. It was so faint I almost dismissed it. "Beautiful," it seemed to say. I stopped in my tracks, heart thumping, and glanced around. The street was busy with tourists snapping photos, couples heading to dinner, a faint hum of traffic, nothing out of the ordinary. I figured my imagination was playing tricks, fueled by the excitement of the new display, and I went home to my apartment, determined to get a good night's sleep. The next morning I arrived early to finish setting up a Valentine's promotion. As I switched on the lights, I froze. The mannequin with the red rose didn't seem to be in its original spot. Maybe I'd misremembered how I'd angled it, but I could have sworn its head was tilted differently the day before. Now, it looked as though it was turned toward the entrance. Chin lowered, gaze focused on where I stood. "Bethany, did you move the mannequin?" I asked when she arrived a few minutes later. She shook her head, swore she hadn't touched it. I tried to shrug it off, telling myself we must have adjusted it without realizing, but there was a nagging unease in the back of my mind. Over the next few days, small things kept happening. I'd find the mannequin positioned an inch or two from where I'd placed it. Sometimes its hand appeared to shift slightly, as if it had tightened its grip on the rose. One evening, while closing, I distinctly heard that whisper again, just a single word that sent chills up my spine. "Beautiful." I checked behind the display racks, thinking maybe a customer had stayed hidden, but the store was empty. I felt foolish for even considering that the mannequin might be responsible. It was an inanimate object, after all, wasn't it? Sleep started to evade me. I would drift off, only to jolt awake from vivid dreams. In those dreams, the mannequin had no face at all, just a smooth expanse of skin where eyes, nose, and mouth should be. Yet I could hear it speaking, whispering confessions of love in a voice that was both gentle and insistent. I'd wake up sweating, my heart pounding, the echo of that voice lingering in the darkness. The next morning, I'd feel off balance, sipping coffee like it was medicine, hoping to banish the memory of those haunting dreams. One afternoon, a regular client came in, a celebrity stylist looking for a dramatic gown for a movie premiere. We chatted for a while, picking out possibilities, when she suddenly stopped and stared at the mannequin. "Vanessa," she said slowly, "where did you get that?" She sounded uneasy, like something about it disturbed her. I explained that it was a custom piece from an artisan I'd never used before, how I wanted something truly eye-catching for Valentine's Day. She gave a tight nod and muttered something like, "Well, it's definitely eye-catching," before turning away. The rest of our conversation felt stilted, and she left without making a purchase. As she exited, I looked back at the mannequin. Its eyes seemed to glisten again, as though amused. That night, after everyone else had gone home, I stayed late to do inventory. The rhythmic beeps of scanning tags lulled me into a focused calm, so when the overhead lights flickered, I jumped. The store was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. I tried to brush it off as a power surge. Then I heard it again, that whisper, "Beautiful." My breath caught. It sounded closer this time, like it was right behind me. Slowly, I turned around, the scanner clutched in my hand like a weapon. The mannequin stood across the room, the same pose, the same rose in hand, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it had somehow moved in the last few seconds. I walked toward it, heart pounding, until I was standing inches away from its polished face. I could see the faint brushstrokes that made up its irises, each so meticulously crafted that they seemed alive in the dim light. "This is ridiculous," I whispered to myself. It was just a mannequin. I reached out to adjust the lapel of its suit. and I swear I felt a slight resistance, like a muscle tensing. I jerked my hand back, nearly dropping the scanner, and fled the store, leaving a pile of unsorted clothes behind. Over the next 2 weeks, the situation escalated. Employees reported hearing footsteps after closing. Some said they felt watched while they were hanging clothes, like an unseen figure stood right behind them. A few even claimed the mannequin's expression would change when they glanced at it. Bethany begged me to return it, but I refused. I had paid a hefty sum for that piece, and besides, returning it because of ghost stories would be terrible for my boutique's reputation. I told her we'd keep it through the Valentine's promotion, then quietly retire it. She didn't look convinced. Then came Valentine's Day itself. The city was buzzing with energy, couples everywhere, red and pink decorations lining every street. I arrived before dawn to set up a special window arrangement of dresses and suits in romantic shades. The mannequin was the star of the display, front and center, holding that rose. I tried not to focus on its face as I worked, but I caught myself glancing at it repeatedly, uneasy. Once the display was finished, I stepped back to admire it, telling myself it was just another marketing gimmick, just another day to boost sales. By noon, business was brisk. Tourists wandered in, snapping pictures, buying small accessories as souvenirs. A few paused at the mannequin, taking selfies, remarking on how lifelike it looked. Some were clearly creeped out, but in Beverly Hills, a little bit of the bizarre can be a selling point. I pretended everything was normal, helping customers, rearranging racks, but inside I felt a queasy tension. Then, in the early evening, as the sky began to turn a soft pink, I noticed a small folded note protruding from the mannequin's suit pocket. That note had definitely not been there earlier. Heart pounding, I reached for it. The paper felt cold, as though it had been in a freezer. With trembling hands, I opened it. One sentence. "Now we can finally be together." I stepped back, nearly colliding with a rack of shoes. Fear bubbled up inside me. Had someone snuck in, typed or written that note as a prank? Or was it something else? Something I couldn't explain logically. I crammed the note into my pocket and decided I'd had enough. Once the store closed, I'd call the artisan, demand an explanation or a refund. If I had to, I'd toss the mannequin out altogether. Closing time arrived, and I sent the employees home, insisting I'd lock up alone. I turned off the music, switched off most of the lights, and took out my phone to make a call. Before I could dial, I heard a noise from the back office, like a shuffling sound. I crept toward it, heart hammering, but the office was dark and empty. Then something on my desk caught my eye, the security monitor. In one of the camera feeds, I saw the mannequin standing near the register. But that didn't make sense because I'd left it in the front window display. As I watched, it seemed to move. Just a small tilt of the head, the slightest shift of the shoulders, but enough to send pure terror racing through me. The screen flickered, and the feed went black. I bolted back into the main showroom, searching for any sign of movement. The mannequin was exactly where it had been in the window. My breath came in short gasps as I realized I might be losing my mind. I reached for the mannequin, ready to drag it into the storage room, but an overwhelming feeling of dread paralyzed me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Bethany calling. I answered with a shaky whisper. "Hello, Vanessa," she said, voice quivering. "I checked the security footage from earlier. You need to leave. Right now." "Why?" I managed to choke out. It moved. I saw it on the playback. Walking. I froze, gaze locked on those painted eyes. Something in them seemed triumphant. Slowly I backed away, still holding the phone. Bethany was begging me to get out, to lock the doors, call the police, anything. But my feet felt glued to the floor. The mannequin's head seemed to tilt just enough to meet my eyes, as though it was alive, hungry. "Beautiful," a voice whispered, and this time I knew it wasn't just in my head. My skin prickled with cold sweat. I don't remember how I forced my legs to move, but somehow I managed to sprint for the exit, not daring to look back. Once outside, I locked the doors, my fingers shaking so badly I could hardly work the keys. I stared through the glass, expecting to see the mannequin pounding on it, but the showroom was still, The figure remained in its spot, rose in hand, as though it had never moved at all. Yet I couldn't stop trembling, the note's words echoing in my mind, "Now we can finally be together." Early the next morning, I called a hauling service to take the mannequin away, lying that I'd found a serious defect and wanted it gone immediately. When they arrived, I stayed outside, refusing to watch them dismantle the display. I never wanted to see that thing again. It took the workers about an hour. One of them approached me afterward, looking pale. "Lady, there was something off about that dummy," he muttered. Felt like it was watching me the whole time. I just nodded numbly and signed the paperwork, my heart still hammering in my chest. For a few days, I expected the worst, that I'd find another note, another whisper in the darkness of the boutique. But nothing happened. Slowly, I began to breathe easier. The employees seemed relieved, and Bethany even joked about how we should stick to plain, boring mannequins from now on. Yet sometimes, when I'm locking up at night, I swear I sense a presence behind me, see a flicker of a reflection in the glass door. I still have nightmares about that faceless figure whispering confessions of love, nightmares so vivid that I wake up drenched in sweat. If I had the courage, I'd review the security footage from that last night in detail, but I can't bring myself to do it. Something about the note, the whispered words, the way it seemed so determined to be near me, none of it makes sense. But I know one thing for sure. Some obsessions transcend life. Whether it was haunted, possessed, or something else entirely, that mannequin wanted me all to itself. And even though it's gone, I can't shake the feeling that somewhere it's still watching, waiting for another chance to claim me. Love can be a beautiful force, but as these 6 stories have shown, it also carries the potential to become something far darker. When simple devotion warps into obsession, boundaries shatter, leading to hidden motives, controlling behavior, and sometimes even unearthly manifestations. Whether it was a blind date in Chicago, or a walk through a New Orleans townhouse haunted by a lost spouse, each tale revealed that danger often grows where we least expect it, within the soft glow of romance. We might crave closeness and yearn to be understood, but when someone's desire for connection turns into relentless pursuit, nothing good can follow. One key lesson is to trust your instincts if something feels off about a new relationship, whether it's a date who knows too many details, an admirer lurking in unexpected places, or unexplained happenings at home. It's better to investigate than dismiss your fears. Healthy love never demands that you sacrifice your safety, your sanity, or your sense of self. We all want to be cherished, but never at the cost of ignoring dangerous red flags. And for those dealing with the supernatural twists of life, these stories are a reminder that not every force can be reasoned with. Sometimes the only option is to cut ties, physically and emotionally, and protect yourself at all costs. Ultimately, no matter how strong the longing for companionship may be, your well-being should always come first. Thank you for joining us at Enigma of the Unknown and delving into these haunting Valentine's Day stories. We appreciate your time, your curiosity, and your bravery in facing the darker edges of love. If you enjoyed the journey, be sure to subscribe and stay tuned for more unsettling tales. And remember, true love is worth waiting for, but a safe heart is worth everything.